On April 19th, 1943, a Swiss chemist named Albert Hofmann climbed onto his bicycle and pedaled from work through the streets of Basel. He had swallowed 250 micrograms or millionths of a gram of a chemical he'd first made 5 years earlier and then forgotten about. Within an hour, reality was disintegrating. His lab assistant later said they'd been riding fast. Hoffman felt like he wasn't moving at all. His neighbor looked like a witch. He was convinced he was dying. He was not dying. He was taking the first intentional LSD trip in human history, and that bicycle ride would set off a chain of events that, 83 years later, is still unfinished. A story of extraordinary medical promise, deliberate political destruction, and now a comeback that might change how we treat the human mind. This is Roby with the Manufactured Mind. I hope everybody's doing well today. You'll have to forgive me. I missed last week. I didn't post anything last week as far as episodes go. I was down and out pretty bad. I'm having really bad stomach issues and what have you. Low motivation, low drive. Just wasn't feeling it. So I'm feeling a little better right at this very moment. So I'm going to do my best to get through this as swift as possible and cover everything. But first, if you don't mind, because your support is greatly appreciated and it's how you can help me get into the algorithm both on YouTube and Podbean and Spotify. So if you could like and subscribe on Podbean, follow me on Podbean and subscribe on YouTube, I would very much appreciate your support. Without further ado, let's dive right in. Today's episode is called The Molecule They Couldn't Kill, LSD's Therapeutic Renaissance. So, today we're going to dive deep on lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD, not the counterculture mythology, not the horror stories, the science. What this molecule actually does inside your brain, what it did for patients before the government shut it down, and what it's doing for patients right now in clinical trials that could lead to the very first FDA-approved LSD medicine in American history. This is one for the books, folks, and this one is personal for me. I'll get to that, but first, let's go back to Basel. After Hofmann was not looking for a mind-altering drug, Albert Hofmann, sorry, I don't know why I said after. Albert Hofmann was not looking for a mind-altering drug. He was a research chemist at Sandoz Laboratories, synthesizing derivatives of ergot, a fungus that grows on grain, hoping to find a circulatory stimulant. On November 16th, 1938, he created the 25th compound in his lysergic acid series, LSD-25. Animal tests showed nothing remarkable. The compound was shelved. 5 years passed. Then, on April 16th, 1943, acting on what he later described as a peculiar presentiment that the substance could possess properties other than those established in the first investigations, Hofmann went back and resynthesized LSD-25. During the final steps, he accidentally absorbed a tiny amount, probably by touching his fingers to his mouth. He reported to his supervisors that he was forced to stop work. At home, he experienced what he called an uninterrupted stream of fantastic pictures, extraordinary shapes with intense kaleidoscopic play of colors. It lasted about 2 hours. Excuse me. 3 days later, on April 19th, 1943, the date now celebrated as Bicycle Day, Hofmann deliberately took 250 micrograms dissolved in water. He thought this was a cautiously small a small dose based on comparable compounds. It was in fact enormously strong. A typical dose today is 100 to 150 micrograms. By 5 in the afternoon, his lab notes trailed off. During the bicycle ride home, he experienced profound visual distortions, terror, and then beauty. A doctor summoned to examine him found nothing physically wrong except extremely dilated pupils. That was it. That was the beginning. Sandoz recognized what it had. By 1947, the company was marketing LSD under the trade name Delicit in 25 microgram tablets for use in psychiatry. What do you know, folks? Their marketing literature made a remarkable suggestion that psychiatrists should take LSD themselves to better understand their patients' inner experiences, and many did. And I agree with that. I think that when this stuff does come into play, when it does come into therapy and, psychiatry use, I am I'm 100% behind that. I think that the psychiatrist who would be prescribing this should, in fact, dose themselves at least once so that they can understand where their patient is coming from. There is an an underrated value of experiential wisdom. A very underrated value. Experiential wisdom brings wisdom like no other. There is things that you learn from experience that no book, no lecture, no fucking YouTube video is going to ever be able to teach you the way that experiential experiences do. Experiential wisdom gained from experiences is the most valuable wisdom that I think anyone could possibly have. That's my opinion. But man, something's in my fucking throat today. Again, like always. And so what happened next after these psychiatrists took it was extraordinary. Over the following 15 years, LSD generated more than 1,000 scientific papers, several dozen books, and 6 international conferences. More than 40,000 patients were treated. Time magazine ran 6 positive reports between 1954 and 1959. Major research programs operated at institutions across North America and Europe. This wasn't fringe. This was mainstream psychiatry, and the results were getting attention. The most important early work, though, happened in, let me see if I can get this right, Saskatchewan, Saskatchewan, Canada, led by a British psychiatrist named Humphrey Osmond. Osmond had moved to Wyburn Mental Hospital in 1951, funded by the Canadian government and the Rockefeller Foundation. Interesting. He teamed up with the biochemist Abram Hoffer, and together they began treating chronic alcoholics with LSD. Their approach was what they called the psychedelic model, a single large dose of LSD combined with psychotherapy in a supported clinical setting. Between 1954 and 1960, they treated roughly 2,000 patients. The reported results: 40 to 50% of chronic alcoholics had not returned to drinking after 1 year. And for context, folks, standard treatments of the era were running success rates around only 30%. So that's a 10 to 15% increase in success rates from LSD. One of Osmond's patients was Bill Wilson. And this might catch you by surprise if you don't know who Bill Wilson is. Bill Wilson is the co-founder of Alcoholics Anonymous. Wilson tried LSD and became an advocate for the research. And I'm pretty sure that he created Alcoholics Anonymous after taking LSD. But I could be wrong. And here's something I love about this story. Osmond and the writer Aldous Huxley, who'd written about his own mescaline experience in The Doors of Perception, exchanged letters debating what to call these substances. Huxley proposed phanerothym, from the Greek for to show the spirit, and wrote a rhyming couplet. To make this mundane world sublime, take half a gram of phanerothym. Osmond countered with psychedelic, meaning mind manifesting, and his own couplet. To fathom hell or soar angelic, just take a pinch of psychedelic. He presented the term at the New York Academy of Sciences in 1957, and Osmond won, obviously. Meanwhile, at the Spring Grove State Hospital in Maryland, researchers led by Albert Kurland launched what became the longest and largest LSD research program in the United States, running from 1963 to 1976. They treated over 700 people, including terminal cancer patients experiencing severe anxiety and depression. I'll say that again. Including terminal cancer patients experiencing severe anxiety and depression. A 1972 published study of 31 terminal patients found that 9 improved dramatically, 13 moderately, roughly 70% showing meaningful benefit. Patients reported relief from pain, from depression, and from the terror of dying. Wow. I did not know that. That's fascinating. And you really wonder why this shit is illegal. It's insane. Like, come on, man. Like, you know how many lives possibly could have been saved with this? From so many things. At the University of Chicago, Dr. Eric Cast independently studied LSD as an analgesic for terminal cancer patients. In Prague, a young psychiatrist named Stanislav Grof was conducting approximately 4,500 psychedelic sessions and developing an entirely new model of the human psyche. Grof later said that LSD could become something like the microscope or telescope of psychiatry. This was real research producing real results. And then it was destroyed. Of course it was, man. Why would they want anything that helps? Or even cures as far as depression, addiction, and anxiety go? Because then the pharmaceutical industry won't be making money because people won't have to stay on fucking pills. That's why. Well, the conventional story is simple. Hippies ruined everything. And Nixon banned LSD. The real story is more complicated and honestly more damning. The first blow came not from politics, but from regulation. In 1962, the Kefauver-Harris drug amendments imposed new FDA requirements for drug safety and efficacy testing. These were reasonable reforms, but they made continued LSD research more complex and expensive, right as Sandoz patents were about to expire, removing the company's financial incentive to fund the newly required studies. By August 1965, Sandoz stopped producing LSD entirely. Then came the state bans. California and Nevada outlawed LSD possession on May 30th, 1966. Other states followed rapidly. The federal government banned possession in October of 1968. And then in 1970, good old Richard Nixon signed the Controlled Substance Act, placing LSD in Schedule 1 like a fucking dumbass. The most restrictive category reserved for substances the government deems to have high abuse potential. Bullshit. Psychedelics is like the least addicting thing that you could take. It doesn't even have addictive like, what are we talking about? It has no abuse potential or addictive tendencies. I've never, ever met anyone or heard of anyone that has been addicted to psychedelics ever. There is no like withdrawal, or it's like not habit forming. This has been proven. And went on to say no accepted medical use, no accepted safety, even under medical supervision. Now, there's a quote you'll see everywhere attributing to Nixon that he called Timothy Leary the most dangerous man in America. And I need to flag this. No primary source for that quote has ever been found. Multiple independent investigations, including one by researcher Robert Malone in 2017, traced it back no farther than Leary's 1996 New York Times obituary written 2 years after Nixon's own death. What Nixon did verifiably say on June 17th, 1971, was that America's public enemy number one is drug abuse. The personal quote about Leary appears to be a widely accepted myth. But what is documented, and this matters enormously, is what Nixon's domestic policy chief, John Ehrlichman, reportedly told journalist Dan Baum in a 1994 interview. Baum published the quote in Harper's Magazine in April 2016. Here's what Ehrlichman allegedly said. Quote, the Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies, the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate the hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalizing both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. End quote. That's disgusting. Now, I know it says it's what he allegedly said, but that's fucking disgusting. What the fuck? What the fuck? Wow. But evidently his 5 children have disputed this. And 3 former Nixon officials have denied it. And Ehrlichman died in 1999 and cannot confirm or deny it. And Baum sat on the quote for 22 years before publishing it. He said it didn't fit the narrative of his 1996 book, but corroborating evidence exists. Nixon's own chief of staff, H.R. Hofmann, is on record saying that Nixon emphasized that you have to face the fact that the whole problem is really the blacks. The key is to devise a system that recognizes this while not appearing to. What the fuck, bro? Wow. That's nuts. I did not know this. But whatever you make of Ehrlichman's specific words, the effect of Schedule 1 classification on LSD research is not disputed by anyone. It created a bureaucratic fortress around the molecule. Researchers needed a DEA Schedule 1 registration, a process taking months, including on-site inspections. They needed equivalent state license. They needed FDA approval through an investigational new drug application. They needed clinical grade drug supply, which was nearly impossible to obtain. They needed DEA compliant storage, dedicated safes, daily inventory counts, extensive documentation, and they needed institutional support from universities and hospitals that were terrified of reputational damage. Obviously, they weren't too terrified of the individual damage that was being done that could have been prevented by using LSD. But anyways, perhaps most perversely, Schedule 1 defines a substance as having no accepted medical use, but you can't prove medical use without research, and the classification makes research nearly impossible. That's a catch-22 designed to be permanent. The result, roughly 25 to 40 years of lost research. That's fucking nuts, bro. Because of some racist ass bastards. I'm sorry. Some man, I just went back on everything I've been talking about lately. They aren't racist. They are prejudiced. Racist doesn't exist because we're all one race, the human race, and we're all one color, brown. But I'll get into that another time. There's a video I did recently, a short and a full video on it on my YouTube channel. You can check that out if you'd like. But yeah, they were prejudiced, not racist. They're prejudiced. Anyways, moving on. So after losing 25 to 40 years of research, the Spring Grove program, the last major active program, ended in 76. The last FDA-approved dose of LSD was administered around 1986. New psychedelic research didn't meaningfully restart until the early 2000s. Senator Robert Kennedy, whose own wife had reportedly received LSD therapy, asked the predecessor of the DEA a question that still echoes. Why, if these clinical programs were so promising, were they being abandoned? Exactly. And I've said why. Everybody knows why. It's the pharmaceutical industry. That's why. Money. And there's an important wrinkle here. Historian Matthew Oram has argued that LSD research was never explicitly prohibited by law, and that the decline also reflected researchers' inability to meet evolving regulatory standards and the collapse of funding. That's true, and it's worth noting, but the practical effect was the same. The science stopped. So, what does LSD actually do to your brain? Let's talk about what we know this molecule does inside the human brain, because the neuroscience is actually quite stunning. LSD works primarily by mimicking serotonin, one of the brain's key chemical messengers. Excuse me. Specifically, it activates the serotonin 2A receptor called 5-HT2A, which sits on neurons in the cortex, the brain's outer layer responsible for higher order thinking and perception. It fits into the receptor like a key in a lock. But here's what makes LSD different from serotonin itself and from most other drugs. In 2017, Brian Roth's lab at the University of North Carolina published a landmark study in the journal Cell showing the first crystal structure of LSD bound to a human serotonin receptor. What they found was absolutely remarkable, folks. When LSD enters the receptor's binding pocket, a loop of protein folds over the molecule like a lid closing on a container. Roth described it this way. Quote, the receptor protein is like a cave. LSD goes into the hole and a door comes over and closes, and LSD can't get out. The lid physically traps LSD inside the receptor. That's why LSD's effects last 8 to 12 hours, while serotonin's effects last milliseconds. The molecule just sits there, activating the receptor continuously long after it's been cleared from your bloodstream. But the really revolutionary science is about what happens at the network level, what LSD does to the way your brain organizes itself. So, your brain runs on networks, groups of regions that work together for specific functions, like vision, movement, attention, and one of the most important is the default mode network, or DMN. Think of it as the brain's autopilot, the system that activates when you're not focused on anything external. It's where you daydream, where you construct your sense of self, where you loop through memories and worries, so on and so forth. Robert Carhart Harris, the neuroscientist who's probably done more to advance this field than anyone alive, has called the DMN the best candidate we have for the biological underpinnings of the sense of self. He also called it the brain's orchestra conductor. It keeps everything organized, specialized, and separate. Under LSD, the orchestra conductor goes offline. In 2016, Carhart Harris and David Nutt in Imperial College London published the first modern brain imaging study of LSD in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. 20 healthy volunteers received either 75 micrograms of LSD or placebo, then underwent fMRI and MEG and arterial spin labeling scans. Nutt said scientists had waited 50 years for the moment. What they saw was absolutely extraordinary. Under LSD, the normal tight connections within the DMN fell apart, but simultaneously, brain regions that usually never communicate began talking to each other. The famous images from that study showing the brain under placebo versus the brain under LSD went viral for a reason. The placebo brain shows next. Oh, sorry. The placebo brain shows neat, organized connectivity. The LSD brain is lit up with connections everywhere, a web of communications between regions that normally operate in isolation. People were, as Carhart Harris put it, seeing with their eyes shut. Visual processing areas activated even without external input, driven by imagination and memory. This matters therapeutically because of what an overactive DMN does in mental illness. In depression, the DMN drives relentless negative rumination. Wow, I didn't know that. That makes sense then. The same dark thoughts looping endlessly. In anxiety, it fuels catastrophic future thinking. Wow, that really makes sense. In addiction, it, it maintains rigid habitual patterns. These conditions may represent what Carhart Harris calls overlie rigid, low entropy brain states, brains stuck in deep grooves, unable to think their way out. Damn, that sounds just like me. Seriously. LSD increases the brain's entropy, its randomness, and flexibility. Temporarily shaking loose these entrenched patterns, and there's physical evidence this isn't just a temporary state change. In 2018, David Olson's lab at UC Davis published a landmark paper in Cell Reports showing that LSD, along with other psychedelics, directly promotes structural brain growth. Dendritic spines, the tiny protrusions where brain cells form connections, nearly doubled in density after LSD exposure. New synapses formed. Olson coined a term for these compounds, psychoplastogens, molecules that rapidly promote neuroplasticity. What a great name. This means that LSD doesn't just temporarily alter your experience. It may physically regrow neural connections that depression and trauma have destroyed. As Olson explained, one of the hallmarks of depression is that the neurites in the prefrontal cortex tend to shrivel up. Psychedelics may reverse that structural damage, and they appear to do it after one single dose, opening a window of neuroplasticity that can last days to weeks. Wow. I'm floored by this. This is fascinating. This is groundbreaking information. Why isn't this in mainstream media? All right. Well, so that's the neuroscience. So let me tell you where the clinical evidence stands right now in 2026. The most advanced LSD clinical program in the world is being run by the company formerly known as MindMed. They rebranded in January of this year as Definium Therapeutics. Their drug is called DT 120. It was previously known as MM120. It's pharmaceutical grade lysergide D-tartrate delivered as an orally disintegrating tablet, and it received FDA Breakthrough Therapy designation on March 7th, 2024 for generalized anxiety disorder. Their phase 2B trial, published in JAMA, that's the Journal of the American Medical Association, one of the most prestigious medical journals in the world, enrolled 198 patients with severe generalized anxiety. Average baseline severity scores around 30 on the Hamilton Anxiety Rating Scale, which is markedly ill. Patients received a single dose, 25, 50, 100, or 200 micrograms, or placebo, in a monitored clinical setting. No psychotherapy, just the drug, a safe room, and trained observers. Here are the numbers. At the 100 microgram dose, at 12 weeks after a single administration, 65% clinical response rate, 48% clinical remission. The effect size was large. Cohen's D of 0.88. Improvements were detectable as early as day 2, and these patients had received one pill once 3 months earlier. For context, there has not been a new FDA-approved treatment for generalized anxiety disorder since 2007. The existing options, SSRIs, SNRIs, benzodiazepines, require daily dosing, carry significant side effects, and have modest efficacy. A single-dose treatment showing 48% remission at 3 months is, to put it carefully, highly unusual. That's amazing. Definium now has 4 phase 3 trials running. Voyage and Panorama are testing DT120 for generalized anxiety in a combined roughly 450 patients across more than 60 sites in the US and Europe. Emerge, which is fully enrolled ahead of schedule, and Ascend are testing it for major depressive disorder in approximately 315 patients. Top-line results are expected throughout 2026. If positive, an NDA filing could come in 2027, with potential approval in 2027 or 2028. The company is sitting on $411.6 million in cash, enough to fund operations into 2028 without raising more money. They're not going anywhere, folks. They're not the only player either. Compass Pathways has been running phase 3 trials on synthetic psilocybin for treatment-resistant depression. Their Comp 360 program has 2 positive phase 3 trials, one in 258 patients and one in 581 patients, and they're expecting to submit their new drug application to the FDA in the 4th quarter of this year. Compass may actually cross the FDA finish line before LSD, though they're targeting a different condition, treatment-resistant depression rather than anxiety. Meanwhile, the psychedelic field is still recovering from a major setback. In August 2024, the FDA declined to approve MDMA-assisted therapy for PTSD, developed by Lykos Therapeutics, the commercial arm of MAPS. The advisory committee voted 9-2 against effectiveness. The concerns were serious: functional unblinding, patients knew they'd gotten the drugs, plus questions about data integrity, missing safety data, and the difficulty of separating the drug's effects from the psychotherapy it was paired with. The rejection sent shockwaves through the entire field. And this is where LSD has a crucial structural advantage. DT120 is designed as a standalone drug. No psychotherapy, no therapy, drug confound. This directly avoids the central problem that sank MDMA. The FDA can evaluate it the way it evaluates any other medicine. Does the drug work better than placebo? That's a cleaner regulatory path. Now, let's talk about addiction because this is where LSD research actually began and where the evidence, though old, is surprisingly very strong. Remember Osmond's Saskatchewan trials, the 40 to 45% sober rates in chronic alcoholics. Remember I mentioned that earlier? In 2012, researchers Terry Krebs and Paul Orgen Johansson, I don't know how you say this, if I said his name right or not, Paul Orgen Johansson, at the Norwegian University of Science and Technology, went back and conducted a rigorous meta-analysis of every randomized controlled trial of LSD for alcoholism they could find. They identified 6 qualifying trials totaling 536 patients. The results: one single dose of LSD was associated with an odds ratio of 1.96, meaning LSD nearly doubled the odds of improved alcohol outcomes compared to controls. The statistical significance was strong, with a p-value of 0.00003, and there was essentially zero variation between the 6 trials. Two important caveats. Two important caveats. First, the benefits were clearest at 2 to 3 months and 6 months. By 1 year, the advantage had faded, suggesting that a single dose may not be sufficient for lasting change more than a year, and that repeated treatment or integration support might be needed. Which, I mean, bro, if you've got to take something once a year, what the fuck are we doing? That's fine. But a 2024, no, I'm sorry, let me back up. Second, these were 1960s era trials with different methodological standards than today. But a 2024 meta-analysis by Sisignano and colleagues confirmed the finding with similar effect sizes. Man, I cannot pronounce these freaking names. I apologize for that. So what about opioids, though? And I want to be honest here. There are no modern randomized controlled trials of LSD specifically for opioid use disorder. The evidence is limited to observational data. One study of people who use drugs in Vancouver found that naturalistic psychedelic use was associated with reduced daily opioid use, and survey data from about 700 people with self-reported opioid addiction found that psychedelic use was associated with reduced cravings. But this is not the kind of evidence that should drive clinical decisions. Most of the psychedelic for opioid research is focused on ibogaine, not LSD, and ibogaine carries severe cardiac risks that currently make it unviable for FDA approval in any near-term timeline. The proposed mechanism for why LSD might help with addiction are compelling, though. The mystical or peak experience appears to be a key mediator. Patients who report profound ego-dissolving experiences show better outcomes. This tracks with the neuroscience. DMN disruption breaks rigid, habitual thought patterns. Neuroplasticity opens a window for rewiring, and the emotional processing that occurs during the experience may allow people to confront the underlying drivers of their addiction in ways that conventional therapy struggles to access. So, you may have seen a statistic floating around that LSD produced 77% durable relief in patients with life-threatening illness. And I want to address this directly as well because accuracy matters. That number comes from a 2015 follow-up study by Swiss psychiatrist Peter Gasser, who conducted the first modern clinical trial of LSD, assisted psychotherapy, in patients with anxiety related to life-threatening diseases, published in 2014 with just 12 patients. The 77.8% figure specifically comes from qualitative interviews with 9 participants at the 12-month mark. 7 out of 9 self-reported reduced anxiety. This is a qualitative self-report from a tiny sample, not a quantitative clinical outcome measure. It should be cited carefully. So, that said, the quantitative data from Gasser's trial was genuinely impressive. Large effect sizes of 1.1 to 1.2 on standardized anxiety measures sustained at 12 months, and a larger follow-up trial published in 2023 by Friedrich Holtz and colleagues at the University of Basel studied 42 patients and found even more robust results. A 16.2-point reduction on the primary anxiety measure with an effect size of 1.18. That's a large clinical effect. Depression scores improved too. And in the 12-month follow-up published in the British Journal of Psychiatry in 2024 showed that these improvements were sustained at 68 to 94 weeks after the LSD dose. Neuroticism decreased. Extroversion increased. These aren't just symptom changes, they're personality level shifts. For major depressive specifically, the evidence is earlier stage. The first modern randomized trial of LSD for MDD, published by Mueller and colleagues in 2025 with 61 patients, showed clinical rated improvements with a moderate effect size, but the self-report primary endpoint narrowly missed statistical significance at p equals 0.059. It's promising, but not definitive, and Definium's Emerge trial, now fully enrolled, will provide much stronger evidence when it reports. So, what's increasingly clear from the data that does matter, or I'm sorry, from the data is that dose matters. Man, I cannot read today. I really can't. It's like the fucking words are like blurry on my damn like computer screen for some reason. Like no joke. Across every study, 100 to 200 micrograms consistently outperforms lower doses. And the Swiss Compassionate Use Program, where about 130 patients have received LSD therapy since 2014, and a recent cohort study of 115 patients found large effect sizes for both depression and anxiety, is adding real-world evidence that LSD and psilocybin appear equally effective in clinical practice. So, microdosing. I know a lot of people are interested in microdosing, taking subperceptual amounts of LSD, typically 10 to 20 micrograms, on a regular schedule. Silicon Valley popularized it. James Fetterman advocated for it. Social media is full of people swearing it changed their lives. Here's what science actually says. It probably didn't, or at least not for the reasons they think. In 2021, a team of Imperial College London, led by Balaz Sigeti, published a landmark study in eLife using a clever self-binding design where existing microdosers created their own placebo controls. Both the microdose group and the placebo group improved significantly over 4 weeks. There was no meaningful difference between them. Participants who'd been taking empty capsules and feeling great were, in Sigeti's words, shocked to learn they hadn't been taking the real drug. Since then, controlled laboratory studies reviewed comprehensively in 2024 in biological psychiatry have confirmed, while single microdoses of LSD produce measurable acute changes in blood pressure, neural connectivity, and time perception, repeated microdosing has not demonstrated sustained mood or cognitive benefits above placebo in any randomized controlled trial. A 2024 RCT randomized controlled trial found that repeated low doses does not significantly reduce ADHD symptoms compared to placebo. A large microdosing trial for depression also failed to beat placebo. This doesn't mean people's reported experiences are fake. Expectancy is powerful medicine. If you believe something will help you, your brain responds accordingly. And a 2026 meta-analysis by Sigeti found no statistically significant difference between psychedelic therapy outcomes and open-label antidepressant outcomes when you account for the fact that participants in psychedelic trials know exactly what they're taking. The honest position right now is this: high dose, supervised psychedelic therapy has robust clinical evidence behind it. Microdosing, not so much. That may change with future research, though. But as of today, the data does not support the hype with microdosing. I'll be honest, it's helped me. I've done it in the past. I've microdosed and hero dosed, and they both help. But that's just me, and I'm not encouraging anybody to do it by any means necessary because it is illegal. So do not take part in illegal activities. This was long ago when I did this, but it helped me in many ways. And I'm really, really praying that they actually go through with this and start producing some significant data, even more than they already have, and that this stuff can be put out into the public so that the public has access to it because I really think that it has promising effects. So the access problem that nobody's talking about. So let's say that the phase 3 data comes in positive. Let's say the FDA approves DT120 in 2027 or 28. Then what? A session with LSD lasts 8 to 12 hours. The clinical model requires trained observers, at minimum 2 per patient. Patients need a comfortable, monitored clinical environment. They need preparation sessions beforehand and integration support afterward. Based on comparable psychedelic therapy models, a full treatment score could cost upwards of $11,000, and that's a conservative estimate. Holy shit. Insurance coverage is a massive question mark. Look at the precedent. Spravato, the esketamine nasal spray approved for treatment-resistant depression in 2019, requires in-clinic administration and 2 hours of post-dose monitoring. It's covered by most insurance plans, including Medicare, and yet fewer than 1,300 Medicare beneficiaries were prescribed its first year. Prior authorization requirements are burdensome. Patients must demonstrate failure of at least 2 antidepressant trials. Reauthorization cycles are short. The infrastructure barely exists. Now imagine that complexity multiplied by a factor of 5. 12-hour sessions instead of 2. Schedule 1 substances instead of Schedule 3, and a treatment model that has no existing insurance billing codes. Who pays? Who staffs these clinics? The existing mental health workforce is already short by an estimated 31,000 practitioners. Wow. Training a psychedelic therapist takes 140 to 200 hours through programs at institutions like UC Berkeley, Columbia, and CIIS. But we don't have nearly enough of them. So you make it not a Schedule 1 substance. That's what you do. Like, come on. I don't know, folks. You know, I know that many veterans have done the ibogaine route, but that it comes with, you know, cardiovascular risks. All of it is in research right now. All of it is being tested. You've got LSD, you've got DMT, ibogaine, psilocybin. All of that is being tested. 5-MeO DMT. It's all being tested, and I think that it's all going to be very promising. I really do. I really, really do, and I hope that it is. I've been saying for years now that when I first tried psychedelics, and I first tried microdosing actually, it made me happy. Like that's what it did to me. Like it was like the depression went away for sure. Like it definitely made me happy. But again, I'm not, you know, encouraging anybody to go out here and do it because it's illegal. But judging from what they've said in the research, I mean, it hits the nail on the head, man. I just think they need to do more research on it. I think that microdosing does in fact help. I think they're wrong about that not helping. I just don't think that they've done it long enough. I really do think it helps. I do. And I think that it matters a lot about what you're consuming when you're on these medicines or the psychedelics. I think that it's very important because if you're in a negative environment consuming negative energy, then it's going to have a negative effect on your neurochemistry. It's going to rewire the neuroplasticity is going to create a negative change rather than a positive change. So you have to be very, very careful about this. And that is why they are so strenuous on these clinical trials and, you know, having people being monitored for 2 hours before they dose or whatever, you know, precautions that they're taking. And it's for that reason because this stuff can have life changing effects on you. But if you're not in the right environment, like they said in this research, then it could have adverse effects. Like it could go the opposite direction for you. So that's why, you know, I think when this does land, and LSD is at the forefront of all of them. LSD is closer to becoming FDA approved more than all of them. And I did not know that. I didn't know that until today. I think it's amazing. That's amazing. It's so upsetting to know that they knew about this fucking 60 years ago, you know? I mean, really, if it wasn't for Nixon and his fucking administration, there's people who committed suicide who might be alive today because it helped their depression. Think about that, folks. But somebody who's contemplating suicide, you have to think about it. This is why it being monitored under medical supervision is vital because if somebody's in that state of mind and they take a psychedelic, it could cause them to actually go through with killing themselves. That's why I'm telling you right now to not engage in this unless you're in one of these clinical trials under medical supervision or when it becomes more readily available for the public, you know, to be administered in therapy. So I'm not encouraging you to go out here and seek out something that's illegal by any means necessary. Do not do that. But I do think that this stuff is extremely promising, and I'm very much looking forward to seeing where this continues to go. From my experience, it's very promising. I'll say that, and I'll leave it there. I hope everybody's enjoyed this episode. And until next time, it's Roby with the Manufactured Mind. Hey, don't forget to go like, subscribe, and follow if you haven't already on YouTube, Podbean, and Spotify. I appreciate your time today and hope you all have a good one. Peace out.